morning, everybody, and welcome to The Art as Well. My guest this morning is Pauline Flynn. Pauline is an artist, a visual artist, and also a poet. She has she's had a lot of influence on the sort of aesthetics and color aspects of her practice, which derive from the time she spent in Japan. She studied at NCAD, also the Art Institute in Chicago, and the Kyoto University of the Arts. So without further ado, let's go straight up to the hills or maybe the mountains in Wicklow and say hello to Pauline. Good morning, Pauline. How are you?
Morning, Alan, and lovely to see everybody here.
Good stuff. Good stuff. So you're up the hills. Where exactly are you?
Well, I'm in the Glen of Imal, which is about 12 miles south of Blessington.
Yes.
Just in the foothills of Lugnaquilla.
Oh, right. And is that the
Yeah,
highest mountain in Leinster, is
in
it?
Wicklow.
Wicklow,
No,
yeah.
oh yeah, no, Carrantoul is the highest in Ireland, and I
Ireland.
think Lug might be after that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Very good. So are you quite isolated where you are?
No, not at
No?
all. Everyone thinks I'm very isolated
Yeah.
because when they come here for the first time, they think it's really far away. But in fact, it's only a mile and a half from the N81, which goes straight to Tala and straight into town. You
Oh,
know,
okay. Okay.
so it's a village. It's called
Yeah.
Denard. It's a small village.
And you were actually born in Dinard.
Yes, I was
Was
born and raised in Denard, and I left when I was 18 or 19 or something.
okay.
And I was gone for 25 years. No, I was gone for 25 years. And then I came back because I was wandering around the world and I'd never bought anywhere to live in Dublin, which a city I love. And
Yes.
then the Celtic Tiger came along, and then that meant I was never going to be able to afford to live in Dublin. So my brother wonderfully built us a beautiful house, and I have a fantastic studio. And while I miss Dublin, I've always loved both the country and the city. So I would never have exactly everything I want. So I'm only 32 miles from Dublin, so it's great.
That's nothing. That's nothing.
No,
And behind you is your studio, which looks very beautiful and very neat.
yeah, I'm a very, very tidy person.
So I believe.
I get criticized for being so tidy, but I
Yeah.
have a theory that abstract artists are very clean artists, and like I never leave my studio if I'm working unless I get exhausted. Um,
Mm,
I never leave it without cleaning it up and cleaning all my brushes and not
yeah.
having a mess when I come back in the morning. And any abstract painter's studio or I've been in, they've always been clean, and I think it's because really. Um, Generally we it's a lot about surface on
Yeah.
our canvases,
Hmm.
and it's so, I mean, even down here, I'm not right in the village, but I'm flabbergasted by the amount of little specks of things
Mm.
that
Mm.
appear on the surfaces of my canvases. It drives me crazy.
Oh, I see.
um
Yes, I know what you mean by that. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it could be a little hair, it could be a bit of a feather, it could be dust from the floor,
Mhm.
something, a bit of a cobweb falling out of the sea. I mean, it's just incredible. I just don't know where they come from. And I clean, 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 but it's
Yeah.
still just walking around a room, you're going to raise dust and all
So,
of
so
that. So
you really have been influenced by the Japanese culture.
well, you see, I suppose in Japan too, especially when I was studying calligraphy, I was studying, I would go to my teacher and then I would have to come home and I would have to practice the character we were working on. And Japanese rooms are very sparsely furnished. So
Yeah.
my room was like, it's wonderful because you put away your futon when you get out of it in the morning and you put it away in a cupboard and then you have that room. So I had a small table like a coffee table, and I
Yes.
used to sit on a cushion at that coffee table and just write, keep practicing my character over and over and over for, it could be hours. You know, I could maybe write 100, 150 of those
Wow.
and more. And generally most of those went in the bin. It was just to get the flow of the character and the shape of it and all of that into your body, so that
Sure.
when you and then you might find a good one in it. But it was a kind of a meditative practice, I
Yes.
suppose, as well as
Mm.
an art learning. It's the art of moment calligraphy.
Okay. All right. Now, before we go back to Japan and to talk a little more detail, Let's go back to the origins of your interest in art, which I gather in your case was about 4 years of age. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Well, of course, memory is can lie to you, but this
Mm.
is my memory. Whether it's real or not, I don't know, but I think it is. I remember these people had a little cottage next door to ours, Roaches from Dublin, and one of the daughters there, she showed me when I was a child a little portrait drawing on a piece of brown paper, and I was fascinated by it. I thought I couldn't understand how that was on a piece of brown paper, like a face and a head of somebody. And it wasn't that I took it in my hands and studied it or anything. It was something quite fleeting. But I sometimes find it's those fleeting things that come across your radar in your life that sometimes you have to grasp them pretty fast,
Yes.
or they're gone.
Yeah.
And so that was a memory of art. But my father was a carpenter and a painter and decorator, and my grandfather was a carpenter and a wheelwright, and there was a forge in the yard, and he made coffins. And so all around me was making. There were these
Mm.
fabulous workshops that I played in. There was even an unfinished coffin up in my grandfather's
Yeah.
workshop that we used to play in.
Toboggan.
No, it was up on its
Yeah.
stand, but we used to climb into. We just thought it was all great
Yes.
fun. But there was so many nooks and crannies, and then my father, there would be half empty cans of paint, and I used paint on anything I could find, like bits of wallboard or bits of plasterboard that were lying around. Or
Mm, mm.
I mean, I saw many of those paintings in the sheds afterwards,
Yes.
just
Yes.
rotting away kind of thing.
So
But
with
it
with
didn't
that sort of
matter.
yeah, with that sort of background, then you said yourself that you're more of a maker than a thinker.
I am absolutely a maker. I'm not a thinker. I don't really like thinking very much.
Yeah.
I don't like dwelling on thinking, because I think for me, it's all about my own instinct and my innate attitude to things. And so
Mm.
I'm wide awake to chance happenings and things like that.
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
what I feel about myself.
Yeah.
Um,
And wasn't there a nun who had a great influence on you as well in your sort of
yes,
later?
at the secondary school in Baltinglass,
Mm.
during my first year, thankfully, the convent amalgamated with the local technical school. And then
Yes.
I really, really enjoyed school, because we had lay teachers, we had nuns, we had an army man from the Curragh teaching us sport and stuff like that. And the nun, Mother Immaculata, was my art teacher, and she took me under her wing a little bit, as much as she could, and she was going up to NCAD at night, taking art classes, so continuing her. And she taught me, apart from drawing, which you would do in any art class, she taught me how to do plaster casting and things like that. And
Good.
um, so yeah, she was very, at that stage, it was very good, because it was the beginning of some sort of teaching for me, and some sort
Mm.
of introduction into a possible art world, which I really didn't know anything about.
Okay. So when you left school, you didn't go straight into art college, did you?
No, I did do an exam for NCAD when I first applied after leaving cert. I did a 3-day exam in Kildare Street,
Yes.
3 days of doing composition, painting, drawing, still life, all of that thing. And I passed the practical exam, and then there was an interview, and I was not chosen after the interview, and I don't know why. But really, I don't mind. It was fine. So I went on then, and I did a secretarial course, and I became a secretary, and I did that. Plus, I went off to Germany, and I became an au pair, and I went down to Lake Constance and worked down there for six
Hmm.
month periods and things like that.
Yes.
And my first job was in advertising, Peter Owens on
Hmm.
Fitzwilliam Place, which I
Yeah.
loved.
Knew him well.
And then yeah. And then my last job before I went to art college was with the National Youth Council of Ireland. And
Hmm.
I was the director's PA. I wasn't called a PA at the time, but basically,
That's the
we were
job
a
you did.
small organization.
Yes. Yes.
And the last thing he gave me before I left that job, which was to go to art college. He said to me one day, Pauline, would you like to go to Cuba, to the World Festival of Youth and Students? So I said yes, because I
Fine
love
stoppers of
traveling.
you. Yeah.
Yeah, try. Well, I was kind of working on a lot of the organization of it from the Irish end,
Okay.
because it was a big communist festival for young, or for not just for young people, but for people who are interested in communism.
Mm.
So there were about 164 countries represented at it, and there were Irish youth organizations and political youth organizations, not just, but sport and religion and all went.
And this
So,
was an extraordinary experience, wasn't it, for you?
well, I was 22 or something like
Hmm.
that, or
Yeah.
23, something like that. And it was just, it was out of this world. I remember getting off the plane in Havana. Oh, you first of all, the I'm going to call them the CIA. I don't know what they are in Ireland. Were watching us.
Mm.
We having to go to get our papers, and then we had to go to Shannon to get the Aeroflot flight that
Yes.
had
Mm.
come from Poland,
Moscow.
was it, or somewhere?
All right. Okay.
Moscow, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I remember getting off the plane in Havana, and this heat just hitting you. It was the first time I ever really experienced that tropical heat.
Yes. Yes.
And then there were all these fantastic cultural events organized for us. And one of them was the Isle of Pines, which was an island off Havana that was used to imprison a lot of the rebels of the revolution
Hmm.
in Cuba. They were all imprisoned out on this Isle of Pines. But for this festival, they were going to rename it the Isle of Youth. So there was an event, and a bunch of us went out on a hovercraft out to this island, which was lovely. And then we were up on the hilltop
Mm.
in the village square, and the musicians were playing those steel drums,
Yes.
and there was nice interaction with people. And one of my friends on the group, a fellow from Kildare, he had to be,
Hmm.
he nudged me and he said, Pauline, there's Raymond Castro over there. Go and ask him to dance.
Yeah.
Raymond Castro was Fidel's youngest brother.
All right.
There was
Yes.
Fidel, Raul, and Raymond,
Mm.
or Raymond, I think it's Raymond. And of course, I was always up for a dare. So I said, okay, I'll go over and ask him to dance. He looked very like Fidel. He had the same beard and the same fatigues on him.
Yes. So what did you say
So
to
I
his
asked,
wife? Did you
no,
ask
I
his
went
wife's
over,
permission?
I asked him to dance, and he was hesitating, and she was there beside him, and she pushed him on, and she insisted that he dance with me.
Yeah.
But so that I have a very bad photograph which I can't find, but I'll find it sometime again. I've a
Mm.
lot of photographs.
Yeah.
So that was very exciting. And then it was, we used to go into town on the bus every day, and we'd all be singing Guantanamera, and uh, big
Mm.
parties, and lying on the beach with the tropical rain falling on top of us, drinking Cuba Libras or something like that.
Fantastic.
And just meeting
Mm.
superb people.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah. Yeah.
crazy time.
So was
And
that
then
a
I
full
came,
week, Pauline?
it was more than a week. I think it's
Was it?
about 10 days. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And
All right.
yeah.
Very
And
good.
then I came back to Ireland, and then I got into Dunleary School of Art and Design,
Hmm.
because I still always wanted to go to college, but I was doing other things in the meantime. And really, in retrospect, I'm quite happy I didn't go when I'd say maybe I didn't succeed in my interview with NCAD, because I was quite naive. And I think I remember somebody asking me what criteria did I use when I was drawing, and
Mm.
and I didn't even know what criteria meant.
Yes. 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 Exactly. No, but as
So
you say, everything happens for a reason, and probably, for instance, Cuba may not have happened. In fact, it probably
it
would.
wouldn't have happened. No, absolutely
And I'm
not.
sure a few other things that you're not telling us.
Yeah, no, I mean,
Yeah.
I've had a great life of traveling, and never had an awful lot of money, but I was able to get scholarships, and I always lived quite frugally, I suppose, but yet I traveled a lot,
Yeah.
and I always seemed to find nice places to live and nice studios to work in. And so
But you're good at
I didn't
manifesting
really,
then.
I didn't really worry about things. When you're young, you don't worry.
Sure, exactly. So you went to
Yeah.
Dunleary, and how did that work out
Yes.
for you?
Well, Dunleary, I just loved Dunleary's School of Art and Design. Trevor Scott, the great Trevor Scott, was the director there, and there was a great team of teachers. They were all artists, and the college, the ethos of the college was the Bauhaus, which is really all about art and craft, and it's learning the craft of your art. So really, in my foundation year, we just did, printmaking, sculpture, painting. We worked with metals and glass and drawing, of course.
Mhm.
And we did performance and installation, and it was absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
And then I wanted to do sculpture. Sculpture was what I was interested in more than painting in college.
Hmm. Okay.
So I stayed there for 3 years, and the influence of the Bauhaus has continued to be what I'm really interested in. And now at this stage in my life, I have totally returned to that.
Yes.
Even though I didn't stick with it all the way through, but I was always conscious of it in terms of design and spatial awareness, even on a two-dimensional surface.
Hmm.
And yeah, and design in particular, I think. And I worked in ceramics there with Hester Scott, who's here today. She was
All right.
my ceramics teacher, and I did raku pottery with her. So that was one of an early introduction in art into Japan, because raku is a Japanese technique in pottery. And so all through and also there, I had a woodblock printmaking teacher, Maya Bly, who uh, had gotten a scholarship to Japan to study woodblock printmaking. So
Mhm.
she came there, and um, I was very influenced by her. And in fact, we became great friends.
Yes.
She married and lived in Japan,
Okay.
and she was also influential in me applying for a scholarship that I eventually, the same scholarship that she had gotten, that I eventually applied for
So
and got to go
was
to
that
Japan.
after Dunleary?
It was after Dunleary, I went to NCAD.
Hmm.
So I had 3 years in Dunleary, and then I had 3 years in NCAD. So I think I had a fantastically rounded
Hmm.
art education, because Dunleary was very much about making and materials. And when I went into NCAD, then it seemed to be more about concepts and ideas.
Right.
So
Yeah.
not that we didn't do that in Dunleary as well, but I just felt that NCAD was more focused on that.
Hmm.
So I was in the sculpture department then, and the late Ailey McKeown was very influential with me, because she started directing me towards performance art. In the sculpture department, you could do performance and installation,
Okay.
and as part of uh, that time, we had moved from Kildare Street up to Thomas Street, and the sculpture department wasn't quite set up, and the college had an exchange program with the Art Institute of Chicago.
Hmm.
So I got sent off to the School of the Art Institute in Chicago for my last for a semester just before graduation in
Was that a sort of
NCAD.
an exchange, was it?
It was an exchange, yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
yeah, which was great,
So
and that was
yeah, sorry, go on,
yeah,
Pauline.
no, that was very good as well, because in America they really teach you stuff. It's
Mm.
in Ireland it's a little bit more laid back, in terms of you have your crits and you meet your supervisor, but I didn't find there was an awful lot of teaching as such. But in America they still teach you a lot of things,
Okay.
which I quite like.
Yes. Yes. All right. So where did Japan come into it? Was that after?
Yeah, well, I
Huh?
graduated in 85, and then 2 years later in 87, I got that Mombusho scholarship to Japan, which was a scholarship between the Department of Education and the Ministry of Education in Japan.
Hmm.
Very, very Ireland only had one scholarship in a year. It all depended, I think, on what the relationship was between Japan and the country. So,
Yeah.
for instance, in America, from America, there were probably about 15
Mm.
exchange students, but we had one,
Yeah.
and I got it that year, which was great.
Okay. And this had a profound influence on you. But you didn't spend 4 years straight, did you?
No, no.
Oh.
The first time I spent 2.5 years, my scholarship was for 2 years, and then I stayed on an extra. I lived in Kyoto most of the time, and because I went to the university in Kyoto, and but I wanted to live in Tokyo for a while, so I stayed on for another 6 months in Tokyo, and then I left, even though I had a year visa, which was like treasure. I left after 6 months because Tokyo was constantly shaking from earthquakes, and I just thought, oh my God, I don't think I can bear any more of this now, you know.
Yes, yes.
So I left after 6 months. But then when I came back to Ireland, I knew I wasn't finished with Japan. So I wanted to go back. So then I got another scholarship to go back and do research at another university for an art history degree in UCD.
All right. Okay.
So, so I
So,
had to, yeah,
yeah. So
go
tell us
ahead.
about your practice then, leading up to 2008, because I know things changed then.
Yeah, well, basically in Japan, I was in at the deep end. I had gone there thinking I was going to work with sound and performance, and I did do performance, and I did do sound, and I did do sculpture.
Hmm.
But the language barrier was very hard if you have to work with technicians. But then I discovered Japanese handmade paper, which is called washi. And I
Mhm.
discovered all these magnificent pigments that the Japanese produce for, for dyeing and for Nihonga painting, lots of minerals, colors. And you can go into one of these shops in Kyoto, and it's pots of pigments from floor to ceiling on every wall, and
Yeah.
all with a different um, hue. I mean,
Mm.
absolutely wonderful stuff. So, but I think the most important thing was discovering the paper. And I also realized that really, if I wanted to develop my work there, I had to find some way where I didn't need other people to be communicating with. And really, I suppose I discovered more about the traditional arts of Japan when I went there than the contemporary.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So I
Okay.
was lucky enough that I befriended the wife of a Buddhist priest from one of the main temples in Kyoto, and she introduced me to a paper maker in Fukui Prefecture. And in that village where he lived, everybody in that village was involved with the production of Japanese handmade paper. So
Yes.
I went off up there for about 2 months, and I lived with that family, and he taught me how to make washi from stripping the mulberry to get to the inner bark of the mulberry tree,
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
all the processes that went through it.
Mm. And we'll
And
see
I
some
just,
photos. Yeah. We'll see some photos
yeah,
of it.
so it was just fantastic to do that.
Mm. Mm.
So in a way, I didn't spend that much time at the university in Kyoto because there were so many more um, interesting things out in the country. I wanted to see the country, and
Yeah.
so I traveled a lot around the country.
Yeah.
And I even joined the Kyoto Kite Club, and I made traditional kites, bamboo and paper, and I traveled all over Japan flying kites with the kite clubs from all the prefectures and every prefecture has a kite design of their own. And I mean, these things were just superb,
Yeah. Yeah.
superb experiences.
But didn't you find it very lonely at the same time? Because, firstly, the culture was so different. It'd be different
Well,
if
it
you were
was
in Italy, or France or wherever. The cultural difference isn't quite as extreme as it might be in the likes of Japan. Never
it
mind.
it was intense, absolutely intense. Like we were sent to a language school in Osaka for 4 months before going to our universities to learn some Japanese, and then we all just went all over the country to
Mm.
different places. And Kyoto was where I went. Now I did make some lovely friends, a lovely Italian man and a Canadian and Australian and Finnish and that. But
Mm.
really, you were on your own. I was living on my own,
Yeah.
and I had never lived on my own in Dublin or in Ireland. Never
Yes.
mind going to Japan and live on my own, where I really couldn't speak the language, and you really felt for the first time in your life that, my God, if anything happened to you here, nobody here knows you. You know,
Yeah.
this is not your it was so far away. The culture, the thinking, you know, the Japanese come from a Confucian background, so they have a group mentality of thinking that they work together for the group, whereas we here in the West work for the individual, you know. So that
Mm.
in the very beginning was a huge distance between how we could relate to each other.
Yes.
And but I really took it on as much as I could. I didn't become a little uh, white Japanese or anything like that. You know, I was still an Irish woman,
Yeah.
but I didn't want to completely become that. I wanted to remain who I was, and I think they appreciated that rather than me trying to ape
Yeah.
their behavior and all of that. So
Exactly. Yeah.
I really met some lovely people. And
Yeah. So when you came back, how did your career progress after that?
um yeah, so when I came back, after the second time I came back was in 92, and Oliver Dowling took me on, which
Mhm.
was fantastic because it was Oliver Dowling's gallery that I always wanted to show with, because he was the abstract man in town at the time.
Yeah.
And that was in the early 90s. And but unfortunately, he closed up not that long afterwards because of the recession was still from the 80s, was still
Mm.
um, um, in the 90s. So I got a studio. I traveled. I went a lot to the continent, to Europe and Italy and Spain, and went on residencies to America and Spain and Anna McCarrick, of course. And I loved looking at walls and windows and uh, patterns in cities. I love peeling paint and lovely colors of Southern Europe, for instance.
Mm. Yes.
And so they were my influence. And I took a lot of slides at the time when I would be traveling. And then when I'd be back in my studio, I would look at those slides and I would work from them, mainly to get color color combinations.
Yes.
And in fact,
Yes.
I show you the
Do
my
please.
notebook
Yeah.
from, yeah, this is for this, for instance, is a notebook from Venice. Actually, this is my Venetian notebook.
Okay. Mm.
So this book is a Japanese book that they use for calligraphy. So, but it's a great notebook because you can spread it out, and you can you know, two or three studies can become one. And so really I did these to get a sense of color and their combinations and patterns and design.
And Pauline, just as a matter of interest, is that done on the washi paper?
Yes, this book is made from washi. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
And I was using a lot of gouache and acrylic there. I've never
Mm.
worked with oils because the turpentine and the oils always made me feel ill, so I could never work with them.
Yes. 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 Okay.
And also, I wasn't trained as a painter, and I think really to work with oils, you need good teaching. You know, I think it's easier for me. It's easier to work with
Yeah.
acrylics.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So suddenly now poetry comes into the whole thing. How did that come about?
Oh
Because there was
yes,
a
that
moment where
came
you
about.
literally stopped painting.
Well, that's a very interesting thing because I was motoring ahead fine, you know, and
Mm.
even during the Celtic Tiger things were very good. And then I just began to feel I don't want to be here anymore. I don't want to be in this world anymore.
Mm.
I don't know. I mean, we'd need another hour for us to discuss what all was going on in my head about
Yes.
around that time. So we won't go there. But basically, I came to a point where I wanted a break from the visual art world. So I stopped. I just stopped. It took me quite a while to stop, and then eventually I did in 2008. And
Yes.
2009, I was lucky enough to be accepted onto an MA in creative writing in UCD.
Hmm.
And I hadn't ever written as a creative writer. I had used text in performance art and installation, but I never really thought about it as writing. It was just an element of an installation or a performance.
Yeah.
And I was listening to the radio one day and I heard Eilish Divna, who was one of the lecturers in the creative writing masters, and she just at the end of the program she said that they were open for new students. So I had about 2 weeks to put together an application for UCD, and I did, and I got it. And one of the reasons I think I got it was the director of that program liked to have a visual artist on board.
Yeah.
And so I was lucky enough to get it, and we were just 14 students, and it was a master's in creative writing. So we looked at poetry, the novel, myth and fairy tale, short story, and journalism. So in the year, I had 2 modules in poetry. I thought I wanted to write a short story, although I don't know why I thought I wanted to do that, because I wasn't able to do that. But I
Right.
liked reading short stories. So when we did the poetry module, I was actually able to write a poem, which I didn't know I could do.
Hmm.
And because I had never tried to do it, apart from when you're 15 and 16, when you write something that you think is a poem and it's not. Um, so I
Gotta
was
start somewhere,
absolutely,
Pauline.
you have to start somewhere. I was absolutely thrilled. I just couldn't believe it, because here was something, a new medium for me, with the
Yes.
medium of words. And not only was it a new medium, but it was giving me way to be creatively expressive figuratively rather than abstractly. Um, and that just, I swear to God, it just put a whole other dimension into my
Hmm.
creative world.
Yes.
And so I was really in at the deep end there as well, because almost everyone else in the group were already well established writers.
Mhm.
And so I had to work really hard, but I had the time to do it because I wasn't doing anything else. And it was absolutely fantastic. I loved it. And my final presentation was a manuscript of poems about my experience of living in Japan.
Right.
And a friend of mine who was a published poet, she said, you should put that in for the Patrick Kavanagh Award. I didn't know what the Patrick Kavanagh Award was, but I put it in anyway, and it got shortlisted.
Fantastic. Brilliant.
So
Brilliant.
that was great, because that really told me that I wasn't wasting my time, because
Yeah.
sometimes you don't know how you're doing. Um, because
Sure.
your tutors, my supervisor, Paul Perry, a great Irish poet, he was happy with what I was doing, but you still don't know, and I couldn't really judge the quality of a poem for myself then. Like, the poetry module was just 2 modules. It wasn't the only thing we were writing. And it was then when I left college, I was only starting the work then of learning something about the world of poetry. And then I left college in 2010. In 2015, I joined the Carlow Writers Co-op. And that was really where I started writing more seriously, although I'd been with Quantum Sofa and another group as well. So it
Mm.
was before that. But
Yeah.
the co-op was where we really got down to it, under uh, the great tutorials of Dr. Derek Coyle, who's a lecturer at Carlow College,
All right. Okay.
St. Patrick's.
Pauline, what I'd like you to do is read one of your poems, but maybe you might give us a bit of background to it first before you read it.
Yes, well, the poem I'm going to read for you is Reckitt's Blue, and it's just been published this in Skylight 47.
Mm-hmm.
That might come up backwards, does it, when you
No,
put
no,
it
no, it's
up on?
fine. I can see it. Yeah.
Yeah. Skylight 47 is a Galway magazine, and it's a fantastic magazine because they publish poets from Ireland, but from many other places, India and America and Europe. And I've been lucky enough to be in it. I think this is my 3rd or 4th time, and they also featured me as an artist as well. So I was writing a poem about a color.
Mm.
So it's amazing when you start to write a poem and you start jotting down notes, and then you remember things that if you weren't asked to write something about a color, you would never think of that memory,
Yes.
and
Yes.
my memory was of a saucer on our windowsill at home in the back kitchen where my mother used to do the laundry. And on that saucer was a little bundle of blue in a little muslin bag.
Yes.
So I wrote this poem about that blue. So I'll read that for you now.
Ooh.
It's called Reckitt's Blue. When I use ultramarine in the studio, I think of my mother on laundry day. Steam and the smell of detergent rising from the mouth of the top load washing machine. A godsend, she'd say, as she filled the drum from the tap. I'd listen to the hum and slosh of the rotator turning back and forth, waiting for the wash cycle to end, to take the wooden tongs and feed drenched cotton through the wringer. She's standing behind, guiding sheets and pillowcases, squeezed flat into a basin on a chair. I'd wait for the rinse cycle to begin, for her to take the little muslin bag of blue from the saucer on the window ledge and swish it through the water. We'd let alchemy happen and ponder how slightly yellowed sheets appear to the eye as pure white when rinsed with an added trace of blue.
Lovely. That's beautiful, Pauline.
And that is actually what happens. The sheets
Oh,
don't
yeah.
get whiter, but they look whiter because there's a little bit of blue in the white,
Yes,
in part
yes.
of the sheet that's not yellowed.
They even do that with teeth, you
Oh,
know?
lovely.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. To get the blue kind of counteracts any yellow. Yeah. That's wonderful, wonderful. Jacinta has asked, Pauline is fascinating to listen to. How did Pauline support herself financially? Well, I think I can probably answer that because you were teaching part-time in NCAD for 18 years.
Yeah, yeah,
I think that
which is
answers the
great.
question, doesn't it?
Yeah, and well, plus I was selling my work,
Yeah,
and when I was a student, I went to New York and Copenhagen and Berlin. I would spend the whole summer working. Um, in Berlin and Copenhagen, I worked as a chambermaid, and I just worked and made money, and then come back to Ireland, and I wouldn't have to work as a waitress then when I was studying. And New York, I was working as a temporary secretary around Manhattan.
yeah,
So I just worked, and then when I was working as a professional artist, I was really lucky to get part-time hours in NCAD.
yeah. Very good, very
Yeah,
good.
and I
Um,
was selling paintings.
yes, yes, exactly. Yeah. Now, there's one poem that I think may well go back to why you actually changed from painting full time to becoming a poet. And with your permission, I'd like to read it because it really struck me.
Okay,
I rather like it. And it's a
go
short poem.
ahead.
It's a short poem. Now, where is it? Yeah. And it's called On a Sudden Impulse. The woman glances around before opening the umbrella inside the restaurant. She knows she shouldn't offer herself up to superstitious glares, even attack. But she feels pissed off about everything. The inattentive service of the waiter, the noise from the coffee machine pelleting her brain, the surge of electric current in her body burning. It's the slow slide into the invisible vexes her the most, and she isn't having it. She stands up, pushes the chair away, holds up the umbrella upright like a sword, triggering the spring. She feels the snap of ribs against the umbrella's canopy, the rush of air, and all eyes on her. I love it. I think that's great. What possessed you to write that?
By experience of life,
Yeah,
just getting pissed off.
yes, yes, yes. It-
You get to a certain point and it's just a slog. It's a slog being an artist. It's hard. It's hard work. You're working away in the studio, and if you don't have an agent, you're working away trying to get your art out there. I mean, I did have agents on and off, but I don't have one, and um, it- it's it's just hard work. You have to be unbelievably tenacious and dedicated to what you do, and also dedicated to yourself, which I am more than anything else. So I think when I stopped painting, I knew I had to do that for my own well-being. I had to
Sure.
do something else because really it was just relentless, the constant hustle
Yeah, yeah,
to keep afloat, you know.
absolutely, absolutely, and you know, that's shared by a lot of people
Yeah, yeah.
in this business.
So that poem gave me an opportunity to vent
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
without
can just hear
offending
the
anyone.
I can hear the hissing of the coffee making machines, you know. Um, now, just one thing I want to point out, you've a beautiful studio there behind you, but there is absolutely no Wi-Fi in it because we tried it the other day and it just doesn't work. Having said that, because you're a very neat and tidy person, what we see is what you get. And that is your studio. All right.
Yeah,
And you work in the flat because I asked you, do you use an easel? And you said no,
no,
everything is done in the
no,
flat. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
And I think
So,
that's because I really started painting in Japan on paper, and my Japanese pigments, which are like
mhm.
these,
Yes.
they were liquid. So I had to paint on the flat, and I continue to do it, and I prefer to do it. I have more control on the flat for some reason.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I get that. All right. We're going to show some of your work, and we'll try and go through that briefly because I want to give time for people to ask questions.
Yeah.
Okay, Pauline.
Well, very
Talk to me.
quickly, this was a very, very early drawing, and you can really see. So right from the beginning, I was interested in abstraction, shapes and marks and composition on a page. This was done in Dunleary, this drawing. So I'm
Mhm.
not showing any more work from my early days, except this. This was when I went to Japan. This was one of the workshops in the village where you can see here that pile of white is a pile of wet sheets of handmade paper, and the four people behind are making those sheets of paper in a vat of mulberry pulp. And that's me and Mr. Yamaguchi. He was my man,
Mhm.
and he was never without a cigarette. He was a
Next.
great man, and he welcomed me into his home with his wife and his son and daughter and children, and he brought me all around all the other um, paper making houses in the village, and I just had a fantastic time with him.
Yes.
This is me demonstrating actually calligraphy at the Japan Foundation in Kyoto, and behind that man behind, his head is not in it, but that was my teacher, Shingai
Okay.
Sensei.
Hmm.
And this is where I would have worked for many small pieces of paper to develop the shape of this calligraphy creatively. I kept to the rules of the character. I didn't lose the character, but I changed the shape of it a little bit.
Okay.
And
Tell me,
this
Pauline,
is
when you do Japanese calligraphy like that, are they always large scale? I always get the impression that people do them very large scale. Are they
no,
all?
they're not always large
No.
scale. No, there's a lot of A4 size and smaller.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. And this is one
Now this
particular.
is this was the one that I was writing there on the floor,
All
and
right.
this was one that I particularly like. I have it in my house and I love it, and it's called Moo. And it's not just the shape of this character I like, because when I was making it, it reminded me of those leaning trees of Ireland on ditches all over the country that are hanging in there despite the elements and the wind and the rain and everything else. But what's even more interesting about this character is it's called Moo. And
Hmm.
Mu means nothing, no thing, and or nothingness. And I'm very interested in that concept because I really think, and the nothingness of this nothing is um it encompasses a state of being before we ever had knowledge or consciousness of the world, you know.
Yep.
Um I suppose in Christianity it's we have a concept around that as well. Before birth, you're pure
Hmm.
before birth, but then after
Yes.
birth, you already, yeah. So it is a basis of Buddhism that, and I think that's what a lot of Zen meditation is about. It's constantly and the nirvana state, getting back to that state of unknowing. And I
Okay.
just really I like that idea.
Yes.
So this would have been an early one in Japan on washi using sumi ink and the Japanese pigments, two panels.
Okay.
This is a painting. I have it in my house as well, and I will never sell it because I love it. Um, and
Yeah.
I was really testing the pigments at the time. So this is done with indigo
Hmm.
pigment, and the orange in this is from the juice of the persimmon fruit, which is an orange fruit. And in traditional Japan and even in modern times, the persimmon, if you paint, if you cover paper with persimmon and then layer up the paper, it becomes impenetrable. And it used to be even used in some samurai armor, and farmers would line their woven baskets with this because it was waterproof and it would not break up. The thicker you mix the pigment, the darker browns you can get, or you can get more oranges. And so I was testing all of these in my studio, and then I really liked, I always worked and lived in traditional Japanese houses. So they were very influential on me as well, because they're quite dark inside. They're very sparse. There's a lot of verticals and horizontals, and the tatami mats are all fixed rectangular shapes. They might be different sizes, but they're all the same kind of shape.
A work like that up on the walls in the sort of space you're describing would dominate everything, wouldn't it? It would
Yeah,
really,
but I mean, the Japanese don't, in traditional houses, they don't hang work like that in their
no,
houses, because
no.
the interiors are a little art. In the Japanese house, they have a space called the tokonoma, and it's in that space that they hang their artworks, their calligraphy, and their floral arrangements seasonally, etc.,
Mhm.
etc.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
This is a painting that I did. This was one of the what I did in 2018 when I came back to painting, when Maurice Quillinan invited me to go to China as part of a group. And that painting actually ended up in the Beijing Art International Biennale in 2022. They were all seen in
Hmm.
2019 when we were
19.
all there.
Ah,
Yeah,
right.
like
Sorry. Yeah.
we came back at the end of 2019. And
Yes.
then actually that exhibition went on to Shanghai and Beijing as well. But we weren't there over COVID because the work was still in China, but they weren't sending anything out
Okay.
back to Ireland. Some of the work I did during my earlier career was based, as I said, on walls and windows, and also I think when I came to live in the country, it started to seep in a little bit more, and I started making these earthworks. And this, I think, is kind of one of my earthworks, and as was the last one as well.
Yeah.
And this is collaged paper on panel
All right.
washi.
Okay.
This was a painting I made in Morocco. When I came back from Japan, I still wanted some Eastern influence. And while Morocco is not Eastern, it has something of the same aesthetic, I think,
Mhm.
because it's they don't have any figurative imagery because of Islam, so all of their imagery is abstract. Um, and just a sensibility of, like, in the Medina, for instance, when you walk into the Medina, it's all very bare looking because it's all just these small streets and then walls and doors in the walls. So it all looks like nothing until you go through the door. And
Mm.
then you're into these beautiful riads where inside in there you have extended families, and then you get all the beautiful color and tiles. And so I lived with a Moroccan family in Marrakesh for a month and a half, and I did these paintings there. They're collaged, and that would have been another one from that. Again, I was looking at walls a lot as well. You know, they use a lot of blue. The
Mhm.
blue in North Africa, especially the Tuareg, you know, the headgear is always made dyed indigo because the indigo repel mosquitoes.
Oh, does it? Never
Yeah.
knew that.
So
Never
they
knew
use a
that.
lot of blue and turquoise and strong pinks and ochres, because those pinks and ochres all come from the earth, from the soil. So that's how they mix their colors for painting their houses. Now, this is me starting my new work, which is really quite a departure from all that other work, which was always about layering and texture and color. So this is me back now in my Bauhaus element, I suppose you
Yep.
could call it. And I started this work in 2020. in response to a few military medal ribbons in Limerick Museum. I was asked to respond to something in the museum, and the only thing that really took my fancy from all the objects were these ribbons on a few military medals. So I started this in 2020, and I'm still working on that. And all the work behind me has developed from looking at a few medal ribbons that were just stripes and bands of color. But it really, I mean, I could spend an hour just talking about the development of this work as well. How the process is what took over in the development of these paintings.
And Pauline, what we're looking at the moment, is that part of that?
Yes,
It is.
we're at my current work now.
Yeah.
So they're all, and I did a whole black and white series of them. So you see, I've got the circle, I've got an oval, I've got this I forget what that's called, that shape, but I discovered 5 shapes when I was looking at military medal ribbons. And basically it was like, depending on what the ribbon was made from, whether it was very fine fabric or whether it was a thicker woven one, they would all gather together to hang the medal in different ways. So imagine hanging a medal off the end of any of this circle or oval or square end.
Yes.
So I ended up with about 5 shapes, and I've continued to work with those 5 shapes all the time. That was in last summer or last September in Damer House Gallery down in Rossgrey in County Tipperary. It was a lovely exhibition that Terry Rudin and Patricia Hurl, who run that gallery, invited me to be. They invited me to have a solo show there. And it's just the most beautiful space because it was just full of natural light.
Lovely. I'm not familiar with that place. Is it a?
It's a Georgian. It's an OPW building.
Yeah.
It's a Georgian building. It's in the grounds of the castle in Rossgrey.
So are you now sort of, is there a mix of the visual art and poetry at the moment, or
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And I'm managing now to do both, although not necessarily at the same time.
Yes.
I find I have to concentrate on one rather than the other, you know. So I don't really bring the poetry in when I'm into the studio if I'm painting, because I need to concentrate on both of them, but differently.
Yeah. So exactly. So you might spend part of the week painting, would you? And then or else just keep on until you're finished.
No, I just keep on the writing. Now, at the moment, what I'm having is the High Window, which is an online English literary journal. The editor of it is actually of Irish descent from the west of Ireland, I think.
Yes.
And he has invited me this year to be artist in residence, which is quite odd in a magazine. But he's, for the 4 issues during the year, he's including my artwork and poetry, which is brilliant. So, and that's really interesting because I have to put together a small exhibition, if you like to call it, of a selection of paintings and a selection of poems.
I'm going to read a few of the comments, not all of them now. Maria Gabriela says, I love the colors of those Morocco-inspired paintings. Marianne says, very interesting talk. Love the Japanese paper making. Have to go now. Thanks, Alan and Pauline. Rio, Marianne. Owen, such an interesting and inspiring life and interview. Yeah, Marianne said, that's why you paint your kitchen blue, repels the flies.
Oh. Actually, I think Reckitt's blue repels flies.
Does it as well?
Yeah.
Part of the benefits.
And you can put it on stings. You can put it on bee stings.
My wife Trina told me that just before we came on, when I was reading that poem to her. Bridget Connaughton says, I adore that one, the Moroccan one. Riyadh is correct, says David. Oh, did you want to say something?
That's grand. I did a course, an Easter course in Dunleary years and years and years ago. Right. I always remember the performance piece you showed us that you did in Kilmainham for your degree. Isn't that it?
Oh yeah! Wow. Yeah.
That's a long time ago.
Thank you. That was I love doing that. It was great.
Did you learn to speak Japanese, Pauline, fluently?
Not at all. Are you joking? Fluently, no way. I don't have a head for languages in the first place. But I had enough to be able to get around. But also in Japan, the dialects all over the country are absolutely totally different, you know. And even if I did speak in the way that I was taught, a lot of people didn't understand me because first of all, my Japanese wasn't great, but I didn't have their dialect. You know, there were a lot of other things I wanted to do in Japan rather than spending all my time learning the language, unfortunately.
Pauline was very kind to me, and I visited her there, and it was a wonderful experience for me. Absolutely wonderful. Thank you for that. Again,
you're welcome, Hester.
Pauline. But just on the language, I'd just like to tell everybody here, as you might gather, Pauline is very fearless, and she launched off fearlessly with the Japanese.
She's fearless, all right. There's no doubt about that.
I want to ask a question on process.
Yes, Margie.
Yeah.
I know you said you use acrylics, and I know you said about pigments from Japan. Do you finish your work with pigments because the colors are very vivid?
On my paintings, each color has at least 8 layers of paint. So I have to keep building up the layers until I'm happy with the intensity of the color. It's just acrylic paint, but many, many layers of the color.
Yeah, fine. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Margie.
I do at the end, when my painting is finished, I do actually put on you can call it a varnish if you want, but I put on this Liquitex. I mix a matte and a gloss varnish, and I put that on finished artwork, and it just seems to pull the whole thing together. It doesn't change the colors or anything. It just pulls the whole paint. I don't know how it works. I guess that's what varnishing is all about. It just does something to the finished product.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, your work is fabulous.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Margie. Abigail says, fabulous work and a beautiful energy. That's from Abigail. Thanks for that. And Laura says, can you send your poetry and painting process?
Can you see maybe?
Oh, can you see that? Yes, coming together as a performance. Poetry
Not
and
really.
art. No?
Not really. But and I haven't even tried to bring them together, except if I do have a solo exhibition now, I do tend to read some poetry at it as well. But I haven't really blended the two of them. They're two separate things.
Yeah. Okay.
And I don't really see it as a performance, no.
Maria Gabriela.
Hi. Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Pauline, and congratulations, because it was very interesting to listen to your life experience and your work. Two questions I have. One is, how are you going to combine? You said that you were invited to this to present your together your poetry and your paintings. Soon you are going to do that, aren't you?
Oh, this is in an online poetry literary journal.
In a journal.
It's called The High Window.
And how you are going to intersperse paintings and poems, or how would it work?
Yes. Yeah. I'm choosing a selection of. Now, I'm not trying to put a poem to a painting and saying that painting is about that poem or anything like that. But it is interesting because I am having to make some selection process to engage with that when I look at my poetry. So this is actually, I'm very happy that this man has asked me to do this, because it's making me think more about my poetry and painting in relation to each other, because they are going along beside each other. I haven't really thought about them being together. But really, when I've had to select paintings and poems, I am finding relationships.
Thank you.
And did you have another question, Maria?
The other question is, as you know, March 21 is the World Poetry Day. How are you going to celebrate as a poet?
Oh, there's events planned all over the place, but I'm not great at following up. I've so much to do that I just don't have time to be.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I live in a very quiet place. You know, I don't see a lot of people all the time, and And it's been very busy in the last year.
All right, thanks for that. Thanks, Maria. Pauline, thank you so much. That was fantastic, fascinating. Really enjoyed
Well, I'm
it.
delighted. Thanks for asking me, Alan.
Yeah,
and
I
thanks to
think
everyone for
there are
coming.
probably one or two areas where we didn't touch on, but you know, you can't get everything, squeeze everything into.
I'd say there's 55 areas we didn't touch on.
I know. But listen, you're wonderful, and it was really, really a pleasure talking to you and hearing about all the adventures you've got up to and the experiences you've had. It's just wonderful, and I wish you continued success and happiness and adventure.
Yes.
You
Well,
daredevil,
they're
you.
getting less and less, but you never know.
You never know. No. And listen, thank you everyone for watching. And don't forget, if you're watching this on YouTube, do subscribe. It costs you nothing, and give it a like and make a comment as well, because all of that feeds into, you know, the number of people that watch these things. And of course, the more people watch them, the more the benefit it is to the artists. Don't be shy. Please do that if you're looking at on YouTube. Saturday week, which I believe is the 30th of March, Una Seeley will be joining me as my guest. So I'm sure you'd want to watch that as well. Thanks all for that. Have a very happy St. Patrick's weekend. It's not a day now, it's a weekend, isn't it? And Monday off also. And Pauline, thank you again.
Thank you all.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.